Can the Denver Broncos be more efficient in the red zone this Sunday against the San Francisco 49ers? And can they do it if Jerry Jeudy does not play? Plus, where is Deebo Samuel? That is the question that Broncos fans need to ask themselves, and the Broncos need to ask themselves on Sunday. Where is number 19 lined up, and how can the Broncos beat the 49ers? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you're watching us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that like button down below so you never miss a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger site expert, predominantly orange.com. This is really it, Sayre. The build-up, the final build-up for this Denver Broncos football team before they get to Sunday Night Football. I have a couple of other kind of recap shows to get you to Sunday Night Football if you're a Broncos fan. But really, this is the final day of preparation. Friday's practice will be a big one. Now, I think one of the biggest keys, Sayre, that we haven't had as much time to discuss because of the crossover, the Broncos entered this week really banged up. We saw Caden Stearns on the injury report with a hip. He was limited in practice. We saw KJ Hamler return on a limited basis, which was good. But obviously, we saw early on in the week, no Patrick Surtain, no Jerry Jeudy. Those guys were DNPs. Josie Jewell was limited once again. So a lot of questions about this Broncos football team heading into Sunday's matchup against the San Francisco 49ers.
Plenty of question marks, Cody. And ironically, as the team has been banged up on the injury report, they've been friend zoned in the red zone. I mean, I had to drop that reference in there, Cody. I felt like it was the perfect timing here as we're recording. And you know what? Speaking of the red zone, Broncos fans, we got to quickly consider ourselves quite lucky because you know what? For the first, 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season, how many opportunities do we get just to sit back on Sunday and watch the Red Zone channel a little bit here? Got the Monday night football game week 1, got Sunday night this week, got the Thursday night matchup coming up. So we'll enjoy being part of the Red Zone channel on Sundays. Hopefully, Cody, the Broncos do the same. And like you mentioned, injuries kind of mounting up for this team. The injury report was like the graphics design person for the Broncos had to really work hard to fit all the names in there this week. So it's brutal, but at the same time, it's nothing that the Broncos aren't used to. And at the same time, Cody, I feel like, we could be getting some good injury news this week as well. Josie Jewell back practicing, KJ Hamler practicing, at least on a limited basis. Billy Turner still practicing on a full-time basis. We'll kind of see where he's at. But I think as we talk about kind of what is the biggest story for this week, of course, injuries are part of that. But getting friend zoned in the red zone, I love that phrase ever since you showed it to me. That's been the story of the season for the Broncos thus far, hasn't it? It's been the reason why everybody's been bagging on Nathaniel Hackett. It's been the reason why everybody's been looking for, the low-hanging fruit to get after Russell Wilson. 0 for 6 in the red zone. They got to fix that up against San Francisco.
And it could be a little bit more of a difficult task against the 49ers if, in fact, Jerry Jeudy cannot play. Now, granted, Jerry Jeudy left action before the Broncos could get in the red zone last week. And, unfortunately, they were able to target Courtland Sutton 12 times. And unfortunately for Court, he just had a chalk line away from being, having a back shoulder touchdown that maybe would have changed the dynamic. And maybe it's a whole entire different conversation if that touchdown counts against the Houston Texans. We could have said the same thing against the Seattle Seahawks with Eric Tomlinson and things like that. So hindsight is always a fun thing to look back on. But, for Courtland Sutton and this Denver Broncos offense, other receivers are going to have to step up this week. And we mentioned KJ Hamler returning to practice. We'll see if he's able to give it a go. But outside of Courtland Sutton, Sayre, I wanted to ask you, who do you have your eye on this week specifically for the Broncos? Outside of Courtland and the volume of targets we know he's going to get, but somebody else is going to have to step up. It can't just be Courtland. It has to be somebody else. Who do you have this week?
Well, this week, Cody, I'm looking at Montrell Washington. I know that over the last couple of weeks, it's kind of been, could it be, one of the tight ends? Could it be the backs taking on additional, roles in the passing game? But after watching that Houston game, don't you get the idea that maybe Montrell Washington is going to start to be more of a factor in this offense? We saw the play, the end around where he came around, and he was a fish in a barrel, Cody, on that play where he ran the ball for 39 yards. Unfortunately, called back on that Melvin Gordon holding, which I don't think had any really impact on the play. Like you could say for a lot of holding penalties, you could say, well, he wouldn't have busted a 39-yard run if not for the holding. But on this particular instance, I don't think it had anything really to do with how good Montrell Washington did on the play. Then you had the play where he ran the slot fade and he caught the ball, but it was out of bounds, and it was a pretty incredible catch, a pretty incredible play. So, to me, Cody, Montrell Washington is that dude out there. And I think over the course of training camp, preseason, even after kind of taking some lumps in week 1, doesn't it just kind of feel like he's gaining some more trust from not just the coaching staff, but from Russell Wilson as well?
And that's the most important dynamic between these two guys. I mean, you saw the ball placement there that Russ had. I mean, it was beautiful on the slot fade, and it was just a tough adjustment. But the fact that there was a defender really inside his chest, inside his frame as he was making that catch, I mean, I have yet to see Montrell Washington, going back to training camp, drop a pass. Like that to me, I think is one of the most impressive things. And he's also just playing with high effort, not just on the offensive side of the ball, Sayre, on the special team side. Now, there was a field goal attempt that the Houston Texans had, and I posted this on Twitter at Broncos Film Room, and he just lays out, dives, almost comes close to blocking a field goal attempt. But it's just effort plays like that, high motor, that coaches see that and they're like, you know what? This guy's playing his tail off. We already saw what he's been able to do in the return game. I think this is a great opportunity. Sunday Night Football, a chance for a little bit of redemption in the bright lights, the national stage spotlight. This time you get to do it at home and not on the road at Seattle. I would not be shocked if this is a big-time Montrell Washington football game here for the Denver Broncos. And I think that would be a huge treat, I think, for Broncos country and also for him as well. But in the event, you need more guys, right, to step up. I do hope that this is a week where we do see Jalen Virgil elevated by the Denver Broncos on the game day roster. He's been active the first couple of weeks, which has been odd that he makes the 53-man roster but doesn't get elevated. Kendall Hinton gets elevated from the practice squad to the active roster on game day. I don't know. You made the investment in Jalen Virgil. I feel like they got to give the guy a chance, and I think that some special things could happen, but it's going to be about how everything translates on Sunday night. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to take a look at some of the key matchups for the Broncos defense against the San Francisco 49ers. What we have our eyes on. You get to that coming up here in just a moment, but before we do that, let me tell you about Brico, the best jewelry insurance in the game here today. We've talked about the multitude of scenarios that have popped up with the man proposing to his fiance on the pier, dropping the ring through the water, or the guy who tried to throw a ring case from a helicopter, dropped it, lost it forever. I mean, could you imagine spending a lot of money on an engagement ring just to lose it? Well, if you have Brightco Jewelry Insurance, you don't have to worry about that. So here's the lesson. You don't want to be that guy, and you certainly don't want it to be splattered all over the internet. And the guys at Brightco Jewelry Insurance will make sure you get a replacement for the full value of that ring, no matter if it's lost, stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it. Go to bright.co/lockedon. It's the fastest, the easiest, and the cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. As we continue on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, taking a look at some of the key matchups that the Broncos need to take advantage of on the defensive side of the ball against the 49ers offense. We just want to say thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in, making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts or whether you watch us on YouTube. Once again, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. Sayre, you had a chance to talk with the Lockdown 49ers guys in our Crossover Thursday episode, which is available on yesterday's podcast for those who may have missed it. And I feel like in the crossover, we didn't get as much time to expand on some of these key matchups that we were looking forward to because we had to talk about it from both perspectives. Now you and I are just going to sit here and break it down from a Broncos perspective. So I think the biggest key defensively for Denver here on Sunday, and I was even in the locker room, Alex Singleton, I talked to him and I asked him what kind of challenge does Deebo Samuel present to anybody on the defensive side of the ball, and he says, pre-snap, you always have to know, where's number 19, right? So that's where we're going. Where is number 19 lined up? Is he in the backfield? Is he lined up in the slot? Is he lined up on the outside? That's where the Broncos' attention really focuses this week. Where is Deebo Samuel? Sayre, he is a challenge for anybody to have to cover, have to go against, and we don't even know the injury status just yet, whether or not Patrick Surtain will or will not play, but we'll have you covered leading up to kickoff on game day.
We will, and absolutely, it's going to be just fun to see kind of how the Broncos defend Deebo, right? I mean, even without Patrick Surtain, I was just thinking to myself, Cody, as we were getting ready for the show, hey, didn't this defensive staff have the opportunity recently to go up against Deebo Samuel? And I was reminded, yes, they did. The NFC Championship game just this past year, the Los Angeles Rams versus the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, this is how the LA Rams punched their ticket to the Super Bowl, where they eventually would win it. But they had to get past the San Francisco 49ers. And specifically, they had to get past Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel, and the 49ers. And Deebo Samuel did have a touchdown in that game, Cody, but the 49ers were limited to 17 points against the Los Angeles Rams. I know that it's very different, but at the same time, you've got a defensive staff that has fairly recently, I mean, relatively speaking, right? They've game planned against this crew. They've game planned against these guys. Obviously, Nathaniel Hackett and the Packers, they went up against Deebo in the playoffs as well. So they're very familiar. And not to mention, the Broncos have a couple of guys on their roster right now that we mentioned who have gone up against him. And I can't help but wonder, does a guy like K'Waun Williams play an integral role this week, knowing how much Deebo Samuel moves around the formation there for the 49ers? Can K'Waun Williams kind of help the Broncos in terms of knowing and understanding some tendencies there for the 49ers offensively based on where Deebo is lined up?
I think that's a huge thing too. And, I think you and I were talking about early on this week leading up to some of the podcasts that we've done that Broncos fans feel a little bit more uneasy with Jimmy Garoppolo under center for the 49ers than they would have Trey Lance, because you could do certain things to try to fluster a rookie that maybe don't affect a guy like Jimmy G. And so one thing I've noticed, especially with the trend, you had it early on. Trey Lance was really connecting with Brandon Ayuk early on this season. Those guys had a really good bond and connection between them two. We know that Jimmy G, his best security blanket option is going to be Deebo Samuel. Now, at this point as well, we don't know if George Kittle's going to play. I mean, he's been limited in practice with a groin injury, and so the fact that he's able to be limited, he started off last Friday being limited. He's been limited so far all throughout this week. I mean, all signs point to George Kittle making his NFL season debut here this season against the Denver Broncos in primetime action. So there is a challenge right there with him. But you also have to wonder, how can it hold up, with the groin? Soft tissue, one wrong movement can re-aggravate certain things. It's one of those things they want to be very cautious with him. So that's a challenge. These two guys, and Brandon Ayuk, who I felt like has always kind of been underrated in the sense of how he's used. But Jimmy G, he understands how to go to these guys. He understands the chemistry. They can do certain things offensively this week, Sayre, that maybe they're not able to do just yet with Trey Lance, right? Because maybe he's not progressed that far along into the playbook. So I think that's a huge challenge. And a lot of that is, can you get pressure on Jimmy G? That equates to our next key, and that is Bradley Chubb and Randy Gregory, Baron Browning, DJ Jones, Draymond Jones getting after the quarterback, and obviously a key matchup against the offensive tackle, Trent Williams, early on.
Right, and Trent Williams, I mean, he might be the best offensive tackle that we'll see in this kind of generation of football, which is kind of crazy to think, just based on it's become such a passing league, and the left tackle position has been so glamorized. And I mean, Trent Williams is an all-time great, and I think he deserves all the credit for what he's able to do out there, especially his fit in this Kyle Shanahan offense. I mean, you look going back to their time in Washington together and now in San Francisco, it's just been awesome to watch him play from a distance and be able to, there was that one point where we thought maybe could the Broncos maybe trade for Trent Williams, before he became a 49er. Those days are obviously well in the past, but the 49ers obviously made a great deal there, and the Broncos are going to have their hands full trying to get past him. So it's one of those situations where does Trent Williams even require a chip on his side of the field? Does he even require the back to be the extra protection over there? He's just that good and that smart. And that's where you have to really attack the 49ers. They have some other areas of this offensive line that are younger, that are more susceptible to pressure. And I think with Jimmy Garoppolo, you can cause some of those errant throws. So to me, Cody, that's one of those areas where I think the Broncos really have to be doing exactly what Ejiro Evero has said. If you don't win with 4, you got to send 5. If not 5, you got to send 6. And you just got to keep going until you can get pressure on Jimmy G, because he's not necessarily one of those guys, Cody, that I think is going to be able to absolutely just crush you with his ability to avoid pressure in the pocket or roll out and make plays on the move, different things like that. I think the Broncos have an opportunity to get pressure here, but it's going to be interesting to see. We know they've been floating Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb around the formation. They've been sending guys on stunts. They've been doing different things. So it'll be cool to see kind of who gets to match up with him for the majority of this game.
I've been very impressed early on here with the Giro Evero, going back and watching the tape. I mean, the way that he's doing certain things, like in the nickel, he's taking out a linebacker sometimes against heavy run teams. He's throwing down an additional defensive lineman, and he's going with a single linebacker, and obviously you have your 5 cover guys there, and we saw a lot of that against the Houston Texans. So against one of the NFL's top rushing offenses, I imagine we'll probably see something similar along that lines, because that'll have DJ Jones, Mike Purcell, Draymond Jones all on the field at the same exact time as alongside Deshaun Williams, and then your 2 edge rushers there. But even like with the blitz packages that you've mentioned there, the things that have stood out to me, there's times where, you have Barrett Browning, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, Draymond Jones all on the field at the same exact time together. And we saw that in that final drive there that the Houston Texans had, and there was pressure. And as Randy Gregory gets a little bit more acclimated, a little bit more in football shape, and he gets up to speed, he's going to be even scarier, which is crazy to think about because he's been pretty scary, pretty good as advertised early on here this season for the Denver Broncos. But Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, Sayre and I are going to dive deeper into what the Broncos need to do. If they do these things on Sunday, they have a great chance of winning. We dive deeper into that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. For the Denver Broncos to win on Sunday against the visiting San Francisco 49ers, Sunday Night Football, prime time action. I'm sure all the storylines we'll hear on the pregame show are going to revolve around Nathaniel Hackett. One of them has to do with play calling in a sense, which hasn't been bad, but more so the in-game management. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we appreciate you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to us talk all things Denver Broncos content and more. But Sayre, I think that really starting things off with really the bigger story this week and the bigger story of the season so far as to how the Broncos can beat the 49ers, it hasn't been play calling that's been Nathaniel Hackett's issue. It's been the in-game management. It's been the time. It's been maybe the decision to be super pass happy in the red zone. It's been those little things right there. Not necessarily the play calling, as we've seen the Broncos have been able to move the ball downfield at will. They've been in good position outside of the times they've had a couple penalties that have set them back. But, this is really going to be the story of the game here, and this is what everyone's going to be watching. This is what everyone's going to be tuning in to see. Can Nathaniel Hackett be better with his in-game time management, clock management, getting the play into Russ on time? He even said it himself this week. There's been an emphasis, and he's been working with Darren Muji, George Payton on what he can better do to facilitate that process.
And it is going to have to be better, right? I think that everybody's going to be scrutinizing every decision from the opening kickoff on throughout the rest of the game. So that's going to be something that is certainly under the microscope. And of course, now it's a national narrative. So, Chris Collinsworth and Mike Tirico are going to be talking about it. It's going to be all over this game. It's the unfortunate reality of kind of where we're at. But beyond that, I think the Broncos have to be able to limit the explosive plays from San Francisco, Cody. As we have in our show notes here, you got 3 guys on this San Francisco team and then some. There's other guys, too, that they have that don't get talked about as much, like Jawan Jennings, players like that. But they have some explosive threats on that offense. So not only does Nathaniel Hackett have to do a better job of managing the game, but we really need to see more of the same from Ejiro Evero, like you mentioned in the previous segment. He's been impressive this year. The Broncos have been very good defensively. I think the scheme has been good. Obviously, they haven't allowed a touchdown in over 6 quarters. So really eliminating those explosive plays and doing so without, for sure, Justin Simmons, maybe Pat Surtain, that's going to be a tall order for the Denver Broncos defense.
Well, and I think the hope is that PS2 does play. Just kind of the vibe I have is, with the shoulder, when he extended it, there was, maybe a strain. Maybe it's a AC joint sprain. I mean, we have no idea exactly what the real injury is. I mean, that information is not out. We just know that it is a shoulder injury. We talked about what it would be like if Jerry Jeudy doesn't play, other guys having to step up. But, defensively, I think it kind of plays into this next key. Like, if the Broncos can find a way, Sayre, early on to get pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo and fluster him a little bit, if the Broncos offense can capitalize in the red zone and take advantage and protect Russell Wilson, not allow him to get demolished by a guy like Nick Bosa, who's got 3 sacks on the year, if the Broncos could get an early lead in this game, I mean, Sayre, we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo play desperation football before. Now, I mean, there's a different set of motivation for a guy like him who's trying to play for his next contract with another NFL team after this season. So who knows? I mean, maybe that's a different chip on his shoulder than it was last year when he was a member of the 49ers as their starting quarterback. But I think that's going to be the biggest key here. Can the Broncos get takeaways, right? We've talked about the amount of forced fumbles that Denver's had, 5 so far. They've only been able to recover 1. You have to find a way, if you force fumbles or if you get interceptions, you have to find a way to convert and take advantage of that. That is something we need to see from this Broncos team. But as you mentioned, without a guy like Patrick Surtain, without a guy like Justin Simmons on the back end, and we're going to continue to see what Caden Stern's status is. He was limited in practice with the hip, something he dealt with a little bit early on in training camp. We'll see if that lingers a little bit, but my estimation is Stearns will play. He'll be all right. They're just being very cautious with their approach. But those are a lot of like hypotheticals, like, oh no, everything kind of needs to go right, at least in theory, for the Broncos to win this game. But like I said, we've seen crazier things happen. For some reason, when primetime happens on Sunday Night Football, we've seen Denver step up to the occasion and turn in a really good performance. But it's going to be a challenge. The 49ers are a good team. Both teams right now sitting at 1-1. I think the good news here, Sayre, is that it's early. This is early in the season. If this was midway through the season, we had some of these same concerns, then I would be a little bit worried at this point. But you know what? It's an opportunity to go out there, get a win in primetime football, because next week is going to be a huge one, because it is Raiders week. So, Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Lockdown Broncos, feed available everywhere you get your podcasts, or whether you watch us on YouTube. We have you covered every single day, all year long. Sayre and I are going to release some bonus episodes throughout this week and leading up to kickoff as we find out more information on the status of Patrick Surtain and Jerry Jeudy and any other injury updates. We have you covered here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.